This build pushes me outside of my comfort zone and it is my most ambitious project to date. Wizards has sponsored me to build a full set of 4 Duskmourn House of Horror themed playmats. Not only do I need to make 4 epic playmats that complement each other, but each one has to look unique and represent a specific card. So stick around to watch me build everything from Crypt to Sauna, Stage to Aquarium. The 4 cards I am basing the playmats on are new enchantment room cards that can be played in 2 different ways. So we have the Defiled Crypt and Lab, the Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna, the Underwater Tunnel and Slimy Aquarium, and finally, the Dazzling Theatre and Prop Room. Duskmourn is a plane inspired by horror media of the 80s through to today. It is a really rich and detailed world with some awesome tropes to take inspiration from. When someone says horror haunted house, we all have a very clear picture of what that could be. I want to try and bring that into reality in miniature form on these playmats. I will get into the specific designs for each playmat in a bit here, but first I need to make the bases for all the 4 playmats. I decided to keep all these the same so they match and do not draw too much attention away from the dioramas that will sit on either end of the playmat. I wanted to make the bases feel really high quality, so I used hardwood with brass components on the frame, and then I used a neoprene for the play surface. I used iron-on vinyl that I cut on my Cricut cutter to create some gold motifs around the border of the play surface. This is my plan for how the components will work together. So as you can see, there is a base that I have just made, and then there will be a diorama to represent each side of the room on each end of the playmat. And now I will send some of these designs to my fancy new machine. A good friend of mine actually built a laser cutter, which is this, and he's lent it to me for the project. So I'm going to cut out my CAD designs using this, and I'll show you how it works. This is the inside of the laser cutter. The glass tube down the back there is what creates the laser beam, and then it is reflected through a series of mirrors, and then comes out of this nozzle here. This is the bed where your workpiece goes to be cut, and the movement of the laser is controlled by 2 motors on the X and Y axis. You can see how that works here by me driving it around with the controller. So first up is the Defiled Crypt and Lab. Let's try bring this card to life. Or death, maybe. So from the laser cutter, I have created a sort of flat pack crypt. Think IKEA meets Tutankhamun's tomb. I stick all these parts together, repeating the process for the lab as well. Now I'm using some small bits of XPS foam that I've cut and carved to look like stone pillars and steps to add some extra detail around the door. I use a similar technique to make the cobblestone floor as well. The main goal of this process is to break up all the hard edges of the laser cut base and make it look more organic, like weathered stone of a crypt might be. Cool, so I have stuck it all together, added the bricks and stuff. I think it's looking pretty good. Now I'm just gonna use some polyfiller and water and just start to try and make this look more like a stone texture, as opposed to just this laser cut sort of hard edge thing. Okay, so we will not have a very good crypt without some creepy coffins, will we? I used a cardboard template and a really terrible hot wire cutter to cut around the template so they all match in size, and then added some texture and a cross to the top. I wanted to make these massive looking ancient wooden doors, weathered by time, that looked like they could seal away all the creepy creatures lurking within the crypt. Now, with that side coming along nicely, it was time to turn my attention to the lab side of the build. The artwork is packed with incredible details to draw inspiration from, like the eerie red vials and the body hidden away in the morgue refrigerator. It instantly reminded me of that iconic scene in Men in Black where they discover the tiny alien inside the head of the body. Such a great sci-fi film. I got to work on some of the smaller details, like a tools table I made from styrene extrusion and a bit of laser cut MDF. I also carved a body which I named Jerry, lying on one of the tables, emerging from the morgue refrigerator. I then painted this section silver and added some cool jewelry beads I found. This turned out to be a bit of a mistake though. When it came time to adding the washes to the model, to give it that aged and weathered look, the silver paint just repelled the black wash, causing it to bead and run off. I had to spend ages scrubbing the surface to make it rougher so the wash could properly adhere. It was a bit of a battle, but I got there in the end. Now it was time to give Jerry a blanket and tuck him into bed for a long sleep. I soaked a small piece of fabric in PVA glue and draped it over Jerry and then stuck him into the refrigerator. I then stuck the tool table down next to him. Now, for the final touches, like the red vials scattered around the morgue. I spent ages scouring the internet to find vials that matched the scale of the model, but I had no luck. So I made them from scratch by cutting up tiny lengths of clear tube, adding some paint and UV resin, and curing them with a torch. I think they turned out great. I also added some tiny lights to each side of the door. I'm a bit of an amateur when it comes to electrics, but I seem to manage to get them going okay. Now back over to the Defiled Crypt. The workshop manager popped in to check everything was going okay. He really likes to keep a watchful eye on everything. I painted the stone using a bunch of techniques that everyone is familiar with by now. Dry brushing and washes. Can't go wrong. Then I quickly painted all the sides of the coffins that you will see when they are stuck down. I wanted to build a little narrative into the model that one of the coffins has been pulled out of its resting place and the inhabitant has escaped and stumbled out of the crypt. So much for a massive door that will seal away all the creepy creatures. I guess that didn't go to plan. I then added some flaming torches to either side of the door, and a dusting of skulls for good measure. Okay, now I'm going to make a start on the playmat inspired by the roaring furnace and steamy sauna. I made the base structure the same way as I made the crypt in the lab, with laser cut MDF that I then painted grey as an undercoat. The main feature of the sauna that I really wanted to get right was the tiles. I used to work as an architectural model maker many years ago, so this was a good opportunity to try and put some of those techniques to use. I used plastic wrap peeled off the wet paint to create the dark lines you see in marble. Then I gradually layered up paint to build a subtle texture, finishing with a gloss layer for that polished look. Then I stuck all the tiles in place using double-sided tape. I'm really pleased with how the marble texture came out. It is quite a tricky thing to replicate in paint. I created blue pattern tiles by printing the design out onto paper and mounting it to cardboard. I was then able to add in the grout lines with a pen, but as I did that I pushed down firmly so that it would add a little bit of three-dimensionality to them. I'm not sure if that picks up on camera super well, but it is there. I then wired in 4 more miniature lights, the same type that I used around the door in the lab. For a final touch, I made a hot rock heater from some spare tiles I had. I'm not sure what they're actually called. Sauna experts? Let me know in the comments. I also made a water bucket sitting in a puddle of water next to the heater using some UV resin. With the sauna done, now it is time to move on to the roaring furnace. I started by covering the floor in styrene tiles, These are a really versatile model making material, as you can add a lot of detail really quickly. The main technique I wanted to use in the build of the furnace is kit bashing. This involves combining parts from different model kits to create something new. I love this technique because you can just let the parts you have influence the design as you go, and you can quickly build up a lot of detail into the model. For this reason, it was commonly used as a technique on old sci-fi films, where you could take models of tanks and cars and repurpose them into the Millennium Falcon, for example. I found some model industrial piping and grain silos that turned out to be perfect to be repurposed into the roaring furnace, fit to power the House of Horror steamy sauna. I highly recommend giving this technique a try if you're new to model making. This is how I started many years ago, using models, shampoo bottles, and whatever I could find around the house to create new things. So now with the metal dry brushed silver and some washes added, it was just a case of painting in some extra little details. The boss was just back in for the final sign off. I then wanted to use some filament LEDs to add a warm glow to some key areas. I have not used this type of LED before, but they were pretty awesome. I can see why other model makers on YouTube use them all the time. Let me know if you have any ideas of cool ways I could use them for magic related builds in the future. I was thinking a glowing Mana Crypt deck box would be pretty awesome. Now we're on to number 3, the underwater tunnel and slimy aquarium. I think this one might be the trickiest one to pull off. Making it look convincingly underwater will be a real challenge, but I'm excited to see how it turns out. I did think about setting it in resin, but I just thought it would become a bit obscured when you are looking down on it, as you would be when you're using it as a playmat. I'm starting on the slimy aquarium side first by building up the base with foam and some plaster rock castings I had from a previous project. Then I stuck down some sand and painted it to look like the seafloor. I then followed the same process on the underwater tunnel side. Now to the hard bit, the tunnel part of the underwater tunnel. So my plan is to make half of the tunnel so you can still see inside and through the clear sections into the aquarium behind. I felt like it was a good compromise to create something that is fit for purpose on the playmat. I used the laser to cut frames out of plastic sheet that I then mounted to some clear perspex. These created the panes of glass that I would then use to construct the tunnel arch, or at least half the arch. Here I am gluing in the arch elements. I need to make sure that they are square and accurate, otherwise the panes will not fit correctly. Fitting the glass was a bit of a pain. Yeah, the size of everything had to be really accurate, otherwise it wouldn't fit. There was a bit of back and forth, taking them in and out, but I got there in the end, and I think it was worth the time and effort because they do look great when they're all in place. I then added some green washes to look like algae buildup or something that would be on the inside of an aquarium window that has been neglected for a while. I also printed out a long rug design that I stuck down to the floor. I drew inspiration from the furniture in the artwork. I'm not sure I was supposed to be using that. Maybe Captain Nagathron or some merfolk maybe? But anyway, I decided to try and build it. I started by making the dinky little armchair from bits and bobs I found, which turned out pretty great. I also made a little side table and lamp to go with it, and then painted them to highlight all the little details. My plan to make it clear that these models represented an underwater scene was to add lots of seaweed and some miniature fish. I suspended the fish on black wire to make it look like they were swimming through the space. And then it was just a case of sticking everything in place to make the underwater scenes. I was super happy with how they came out, and I think they look suitably underwater. Finally, it is onto the dazzling theatre and prop room, which has a convoke mechanic on one side and an untapped creatures on the other. I feel like the theatre gives a really vivid image in my mind of the things I wanted to make. I get images of grand old European theatres with bold reds, golds, and rich timber colours. That combined with the phantom figure haunting the stage and the artwork on the card really helped to drive the direction of the design. Here I am adding some of those embellishment details to the face of the stage. I am using laser cut parts I designed, combined with plastic beads. Once they were made, I painted them gold and left them to dry. I added some wear and tear to the stage to make it look like it had seen many dazzling performances over the years. I then stained it dark to bring out those rich timber colours. I added some dark wash to the gold components I made earlier and stuck them all in place. With the stage coming along nicely, I made a start on the prop room side of the playmat. Once again, the artwork on the card gave me so much inspiration of what I could build. A storage room haunted with the spirit of an actor that died on stage during a performance many moons ago, or a workman's tools who lie abandoned halfway through building a set for an upcoming production. I want to build a space that looks like these stories could have taken place in this dusty old corner of the House of Horror. To create the plaster texture, my plan was to apply PVA glue to the surfaces, and then kind of mix plaster of Paris into it while it was on the wall. I was not very happy with how this worked, because the plaster would just kind of clump up on the brush, and it was really hard to keep tidy. If anyone out there has suggestions on how I could achieve this effect more easily in the future, let me know in the comments. It did look great in the end though. Now back to the theatre. I wanted to try and create as much depth as I could inside the stage by layering painted cardboard from darkest at the front to lighter, brighter colours at the back. Because I was limited in how deep I could make the stage by the practicalities of it being a functional playmat. I then highlighted certain elements with some fine brushwork just to break up the larger shapes. The final touch was just to add some LED spotlights to highlight center stage and draw the eye in. Now that I have the prop room built, it is time to populate it with some objects that belong backstage at a theatre. Like storage crates piled up and wrapped in dust cloths, storing artifacts from stage shows long gone. Onto the fun part, making a bunch of tiny bits and bobs that add that final bit of extra detail to the space. I made a ladder, some paint cans and a brush, and a tiny painting stool. And then it was just a case of composing all those parts onto the final model. So with that, we have completed our journey of building the 4 playmats theme for Duskmourn House of Horror. This project was really ambitious and pushed me out of my comfort zone many times, so I really hope you enjoyed it. If you're still watching, thank you, and please consider subscribing, and leave me a comment telling me what I should build next. I really appreciate the support you all give me and hope to keep trying to raise the bar of what I can produce to add to the Magic the Gathering community. Thank you again to Wizards for sponsoring this build and making it all possible. See you next time.